Picture this. It is 2026. You are a chief information security officer at a major global corporation. And for the last decade or so, you have essentially been walking around with, well, a corporate black card.
Oh, yeah, an absolute blank check.
Right. Whenever a new threat emerged or, a really scary ransomware headline hit the news, you pointed to it, you asked for a budget increase, and the board simply wrote the check.
It was an era of just unbounded spending and driven by a very real, very urgent need to catch up to the digital age. I mean, boards were terrified of being the next front page breach.
Totally.
So they threw money at the problem. But, fear is not a sustainable financial strategy.
No, it's really not. And now, you walk into the boardroom and the music has completely stopped. The blank check era is over. The finance department has entered the chat, and they are demanding the exact same rigorous return on investment metrics from cybersecurity that they have demanded from traditional IT for years. It reminds me of a college student who has had unlimited access to their parents' credit card for 4 years. And suddenly, upon graduation, they are handed a strict monthly allowance and a heavily scrutinized ledger. I mean, the shock to the system is absolute.
The graduation analogy is apt, but I'd push it even further.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just that the allowance is smaller. It is that the parents are now demanding a line-by-line audit of how last month's allowance actually improved the student's job prospects.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Right. The baseline reality we are operating in today is that the discipline of cybersecurity has matured. Budgets have flattened, and in some sectors, they're actually shrinking. But simultaneously, the sheer volume and complexity of cyber risk is just accelerating.
Right.
We are asking security teams to do infinitely more, with significantly tighter financial constraints.
Which brings us to the focus of today's deep dive. We are going to serve as your instructors, unpacking a really fascinating joint publication titled Reinventing Cyber Budgeting. And this was put together by the teams at KPMG International and TAG Infosphere.
Yeah, it's an incredible document.
It really is. Think of this as a survival guide for financial reinvention in the AI era.
And that word reinvention is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. The authors of the introduction, Dr. Edward Amoroso and Laurent Gabi, they make a very pointed argument. Incremental changes are no longer going to cut it.
Right.
You can't just renegotiate a vendor contract to shave off 5% or automate a few manual tasks and call it a day.
No, those are the easy wins.
Exactly. Those are the obvious, easy measures that most mature organizations have already exhausted. What leaders are being forced to do now is tear the entire budgeting process down to the studs and rebuild it from the ground up.
Because the old way of doing things, walking into the CFO's office and asking for last year's budget plus 10% to cover inflation and new threats, that's dead on arrival.
Completely dead.
But that immediately begs the question, right? If we are starting from scratch, what is the new baseline? If inertia is no longer a valid financial strategy, how do we actually construct this new ledger? And that takes us to the concept of applying zero trust to money.
Which is such a brilliant shift in perspective. Normally, when we talk about zero trust, we are deep in the weeds of network architecture.
Right, like user access and firewalls.
Exactly. It's the philosophy that a system should never inherently trust any user, device, or process, regardless of whether it's inside or outside the corporate firewall. You verify everything continuously. Just because you have the right password doesn't mean you get unlimited access to the entire database.
Right, you don't get a free pass just because you managed to swipe your badge at the front door.
Exactly.
Right.
But here, Dr. Amoroso is applying that exact same architectural philosophy to the corporate budget itself.
Yeah.
Historically, cyber budgets have been built on what he calls implicit trust. There is massive inertia. You have legacy spending. If a tool or a software platform has been on the books for 3 years, it just automatically gets rolled over into year 4.
Because everyone just assumes we still need it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The finance team assumes that because the CSO bought it, it must still be necessary.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I have to play devil's advocate on the sheer logistics of this approach.
Sure.
If you apply zero trust to a budget, you are saying that every single line item has to completely justify its existence every single financial cycle with zero assumed carryover.
That's right.
Does this mean a CISO has to essentially repitch their core endpoint security software or their cloud defense tools every single year, like they are standing in front of investors on Shark Tank?
I mean, in a way, yes.
But security teams are already burned out. I'm exhausted just thinking about the administrative nightmare of drafting a justification for 50 different software licenses every November. Isn't that totally impractical?
What's fascinating here is that While it sounds like an administrative burden up front, it actually solves a much larger, much more toxic administrative nightmare downstream.
Which is what?
The silent accumulation of useless legacy tools that drain your resources. Yes, it demands fresh validation, but it forces an organization to transition away from subjective, narrative-driven budget meetings.
You mean the meetings where whoever tells the scariest story gets the most funding?
Precisely. Zero Trust emphasizes breaking large, opaque entities into smaller, observable, and verifiable microdomains. Look at a typical enterprise budget today. You might see a massive line item that just says operating expenses or endpoint licensing.
Right, it's just a huge bucket of money.
It's a black box. Disaggregating trust means you slice those large categories into functional components. You are forcing the organization to prove with continuous data that a specific tool is still actively mitigating a relevant threat. If it's not, the funding is cut.
I see. It is almost like the watertight compartments on a submarine. If one compartment, or in this case, one specific security tool, is failing to hold back the water, you seal it off.
Yes.
You cut the funding to that specific compartment to save the overall budget, rather than letting the wasted money drag down the entire IT department.
That captures the containment aspect beautifully.
Hmm.
But let's take the analogy a step further. It's not just sealing off the flooded compartment. It's recognizing that we shouldn't be paying to heat and air condition a compartment that has been empty for 3 years.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Zero trust budgeting flushes out the shelfware. The tools you bought because they were trendy, but that no one actually integrated into the security stack.
But wait, if we are forcing every single tool and line item to justify its existence from scratch every year, how do we actually measure that justification? What is the yardstick?
Well, that's the multi-million-dollar question.
Right. Because if the metric is just, this firewall blocked 10,000 pings yesterday, that doesn't actually tell the board anything about business value.
And that is exactly where the zero trust budgeting model falls apart, if it isn't paired with a completely new metric for success. Which brings us to today's framework on the risk-based approach.
Okay, yes.
The premise here is fundamental. The ultimate defining purpose of any cybersecurity investment is to reduce risk. It's not to buy cool tech, and not to achieve perfect, unbreachable security, which is impossible anyway.
Right, you can't be 100% secure.
Exactly. It is to reduce business risk to an acceptable level. Yet, as Tuteja points out, current budgets are wildly misaligned with actual organizational risk.
There's a really great, highly relatable example in the text to illustrate this misalignment. Let's say someone on the security team proposes deploying a shiny new AI security platform.
Everybody wants AI right now.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds amazing. It has all the right buzzwords. The vendor threw a great dinner to pitch it, and everyone wants to say they are leveraging AI. But under Tuteja's framework, if the specific purpose of that solution or the specific business threat it is supposed to mitigate is unclear, the investment has to be delayed.
Right.
You don't buy it just because it's the new hot thing. You wait until a real, documented threat is identified that specifically requires that tool to solve it.
Which requires a massive cultural shift. It demands what Tuteja calls alignment. Alignment means that every single budget category must be mapped directly to a quantified risk.
So what does this all mean? It means auditing the budget by physically mapping the dollars. You are literally drawing a line from the $100,000 on the spreadsheet to a specific documented danger to the business, like data exfiltration from the customer database.
Exactly.
If you can't draw a direct, provable line from the tool to the specific risk it reduces, the money doesn't get spent.
But I'd push back on the idea that this is just a one-time auditing exercise.
Okay.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where Tuteja's second principle, adaptability, becomes the real hurdle for legacy corporations. Cyber risk is not a static phenomenon. It evolves at varying speeds.
Yeah, things change fast.
Right. The threat landscape in January might look completely different than the threat landscape in May. Therefore, locking your budget in stone once a year, which is how 99% of corporations operate, is a fundamentally flawed financial strategy.
Because the ransomware syndicates don't care about your Q3 fiscal calendar.
They certainly don't. If a new zero-day vulnerability emerges in May that threatens your core product line, your budget needs the flexibility to adapt in May. It requires a continuous updating process.
Wow, so you're constantly shifting money around.
You have to. You might need to dynamically reallocate funds from a lower risk area, maybe delaying a routine hardware refresh, to immediately spin up defenses for this new vector.
Which sounds great in theory, but as anyone who has ever worked in a massive enterprise knows, moving money around mid-year is like trying to turn a cargo ship with a canoe paddle.
It's incredible.
But I see the point. When you dynamically map spending to risk, you are finally speaking the language of the enterprise board. You aren't talking about malware signatures. You are talking about capital allocation against business continuity.
It proves to the board that you are delivering measurable business outcomes. But we have to address the elephant in the room here.
Which is?
Tying budgets to risk introduces a massive, glaring cognitive problem for the people actually doing the work.
Right, because if I have to map my dollars to risk, what happens when my security dashboard tells me that literally everything is a critical risk?
Exactly.
This brings us to David Newman's section on risk compression. And anyone who has ever looked at a Security Operations Center dashboard knows this fatigue intimately.
Risk compression is the psychological and operational paralysis that sets in when an organization loses the ability to distinguish between varying levels of threat.
It's just a wall of red flashing lights.
Exactly. Imagine looking at an automated vulnerability assessment. If the software flags 400 different issues as high priority, and every single morning threat briefing introduces a new vector that requires immediate critical attention, what is the practical result?
You go numb. It is the dashboard of doom.
The dashboard of doom, yes.
If everything is a 5-alarm fire, then nothing is. You lose the ability to make meaningful distinctions, and if you treat every single one of those 400 critical alerts equally, you end up spreading your budget so thin that you aren't actually defending against anything effectively. You are just checking compliance boxes and praying.
This raises an important question. How do you practically allocate highly constrained resources when everything on your desk earns a critical label? How do you choose what to fund?
Well, Neumann's answer to this is that organizations have to move away from theoretical risk calculations. I like to think of it as the difference between worrying about a theoretical meteor strike versus buying an umbrella because you look outside and see dark clouds.
That's a good way to frame it.
Right. Both are technically risks to your well-being. But one is a theoretical low probability calculation, and the other is a demonstrated high probability event based on observable evidence. We spend way too much money defending against the meteor.
I like the umbrella analogy, but in cybersecurity, it's actually harder to tell if it's raining.
Fair point.
To cut through the noise of risk compression, you need evidence-based assessment methodologies. You have to ground your risk scores in demonstrated threat capabilities and actual business impacts. You can't just trust the automated dashboard.
And the text gets into the how of this, which is where I think it gets really challenging. It suggests using red team exercises, where you hire elite ethical hackers to actively try to breach your specific defenses to see what vulnerabilities are truly exploitable.
Right, actual stress testing.
Yeah, and you also use near-miss analysis, looking at attacks that almost succeeded to understand what stopped them. But here's my pushback. Isn't red teaming incredibly expensive? If my overarching problem is that my budget has been slashed, how on earth do I justify hiring a boutique hacking firm just to prove which of my 400 alerts are real?
It was a fair objection, but it fundamentally misunderstands the ROI of evidence-based testing.
Okay, explain that.
The cost of a targeted red team exercise is a fraction of the cost of defending the wrong asset for 5 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Let's say your dashboard flags a vulnerability in an old legacy server as critical. You might spend hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to build a custom security wrapper around it. But a red team might come in and prove that because that server is buried behind 3 other segmented networks, it is practically impossible to exploit from the outside.
So it's not actually critical.
Exactly. Suddenly that critical risk is downgraded to low, and you just saved hundreds of thousands of dollars in misallocated resources.
You are validating your assumptions. And by validating those assumptions, you can go to the board with investment recommendations grounded in demonstrated value, not theoretical fear.
But doing this requires a CISO to make a very uncomfortable psychological leap. Every dollar in a cyber budget represents a strategic choice. You are choosing which risks to address, and crucially, you are actively choosing which risks you are simply going to accept and leave undefended.
And that is the hardest part of this entire framework. Looking at a known vulnerability and consciously saying, well, we aren't going to fix this because we need the money elsewhere.
It goes against every instinct a security professional has.
Completely. But Newman's point is incredibly sharp here. You are already making those choices, you just aren't doing it deliberately. Right now, CSOs are leaving things undefended by default, driven by vendor pressure or whichever headline terrified the CEO that morning. This framework forces you to allocate resources against your highest consequence, highest velocity risks on purpose.
And to truly grasp the difference between a theoretical vulnerability and a high-consequence business impact, we have to look outside the purely digital realm. We have to look at what happens when these constrained budgets intersect with the physical world.
Which pivots us to the real-world stakes discussed in the document, specifically focusing on operational technology, or OT, and the healthcare sector. Let's start with OT, covered by Dr. Jane Goebel. Now, assuming our audience is well aware of what operational technology is, the hardware and software controlling the physical manufacturing plants, the energy grids, the assembly lines, we don't need a textbook definition.
Right.
What we need to talk about is the massive friction this creates.
The friction is the entire story here. Historically, OT environments were air-gapped. The factory floor network didn't talk to the corporate email network. The plant manager ran the factory, the IT manager ran the servers, and they never had to fight over the same budget.
They were totally separate worlds.
But today, IT and OT are converging. The business benefits are undeniable. You get massive gains in efficiency, predictive maintenance, real-time analytics.
But this convergence drastically increases the physical danger. A cyber attack is no longer just about stealing a database of customer emails. It's about a robotic assembly line spinning out of control, or a water treatment plant changing its chemical mix.
Exactly. And this creates a turf war over the risk-aligned budget. Think about it. The CISO looks at a sensor on the factory floor that is running an outdated operating system and says, that is a critical vulnerability. We need to spend money to patch it and reboot the system.
Right. And what does the plant manager say?
The plant manager looks at the CISO and says, if you reboot that sensor, my assembly line stops for 4 hours and we lose $2 million in production. Absolutely not.
Which perfectly illustrates Dr. Goebbels' nuanced point in the text. You cannot just blindly throw cybersecurity money at every single piece of connected operational technology. The goal is to use targeted tooling to defend the areas of greatest vulnerability without pouring funds into operational assets that aren't actually in danger.
It requires extreme discipline. You have to understand the specific physical impacts of a digital breach. If that outdated sensor is on a closed loop that can't actually affect the main robotic arm, maybe you deliberately choose to accept the risk. It goes back to that deliberate allocation of constrained resources.
And nowhere is the physical impact of digital failure more acute than in the healthcare sector, which is the focus of Raj Chima's section. We all know healthcare is consistently one of the most frequently targeted sectors for ransomware.
Because the data is so valuable.
Right. The data is valuable, and the pressure to pay a ransom is immense when human lives are literally on the line.
But the nature of the risk in healthcare has fundamentally shifted in the last few years, and the budgeting process hasn't caught up.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text points out that things like digital diagnostics, appointment scheduling platforms, remote patient monitoring, and shared electronic care records, we used to just lump those under IT systems.
Just back office schools.
Exactly. But they aren't anymore. They are, to quote the document directly, clinical enablers.
That is a profound distinction, and it completely rewrites the risk equation.
Yeah.
When a hospital's digital infrastructure fails today, it's not just that the billing department has to use paper. It means the MRI machine can't transmit the scan to the surgeon. It means the pharmacy can't verify medication allergies. Care physically slows down or stops entirely.
It's terrifying. When those systems are compromised, patient safety is directly, immediately jeopardized.
Therefore, in the healthcare sector, cybersecurity is completely inseparable from service continuity and human safety. It is no longer a back-office IT problem. It is a frontline medical problem.
But here is the brutal reality for a healthcare CFO. They are dealing with aging populations, rising care expectations, and relentless, crushing financial pressure. They don't have unlimited funds. So when the CISO asks for $10 million to upgrade the network defenses, every single dollar of that investment is under intense scrutiny.
It has to be.
The cyber budget has to directly, provably correlate to protecting patient data and ensuring care doesn't stop.
It is the ultimate stress test for the zero-trust, risk-aligned budgeting model. If you can't prove that a specific security tool is directly preventing a clinical shutdown, the hospital simply cannot afford to buy it.
So let's take a step back and look at the sheer mountain of expectations we have just built for these leaders.
It's a lot.
We are asking CSOs and budget managers to adopt Zero trust for every single line item, to map all of that spending to constantly adapting risks, to dynamically shift funds mid-year, to cut through the noise of hundreds of critical alerts using evidence-based red teaming, and manage the life-or-death physical stakes of IT and OT convergence.
It is a staggering amount of data to process. And let's be entirely realistic here. Human beings simply cannot crunch those numbers in real time to make optimized financial decisions. You can't have a committee meeting every time a new threat vector requires a budget reallocation. By the time you schedule the meeting, the damage is done.
Which leads us to the final analytical leap of our deep dive today, featuring Dr. Amoroso and a panel of experts. And this includes Martin Tiley, Andreas Wuchner, Phil Huggins, and Patty Ryan. They are wrestling with the future of this process, specifically the role of artificial intelligence in managing this impossible cognitive load.
The provocative question on everyone's mind, the silver bullet everyone secretly wants, is this. Can you just open up a large language model, dump your network architecture and your risk data into it, and ask it to generate an optimal cyber budget?
Hey, ChatGPT, I have $20 million and a hospital to run. Tell me exactly what software to buy this year.
Right. Just solve it for me.
Can't work.
The panel soundly, emphatically rejects this fantasy. Martin Tiley explicitly states that we are not going to see a world where AI simply sets the cyber budget on a Friday and messages the board with the final numbers.
And the reason is that risk isn't a binary math problem. You can't just ask an AI, are we secure, yes or no? Security is a spectrum of business trade-offs. But while the panel rejects the idea of AI as an autonomous financial dictator, they are highly optimistic about what AI will do. Phil Huggins notes something crucial. Security managers today are awash in data, but they are completely starved for insight.
That is where AI's true power lies in this framework. Cyber risk quantification, or CRQ. Think about how we assess the effectiveness of security controls right now. It usually involves getting a bunch of expensive experts in a room, reviewing policies, looking at historical data, and subjectively debating how well things are working.
Which takes forever.
It's incredibly slow, it's highly subjective, and as Tiley points out, it simply does not scale in our modern, hyper-complex technological environments.
Because humans can't read 10,000 log files a second.
But AI can. AI is going to do the heavy lifting on the data processing and the statistical modeling. It will constantly analyze the vast streams of external threat intelligence, cross-reference it with internal vulnerability scans, and map it against business impact metrics to quantify the exact financial exposure of a specific risk.
Picture the corporate boardroom of the near future. The CISO, the finance director, the operations lead, and the product managers are all sitting around a table. AI has already run the complex Monte Carlo simulations.
Yep.
It has refreshed the data in real time based on that morning's global threat landscape. It provides the room with a shared, evidence-based, quantified view of risk.
So instead of the CISO saying, I feel like we need this tool because hackers are getting smarter.
Right, which sounds so vague.
Exactly. Instead of that, the AI presents a dashboard that says, if threat scenario A happens, it will cost the business $5 million in downtime. If we spend $200,000 on this specific control, it reduces the probability of scenario A by 80%.
Wow. The AI provides the clear, mathematically sound storyline. And because the machine has done the quantitative heavy lifting, the humans in the room are finally freed up to do what humans actually do best: collaboratively debate the strategic business trade-offs.
They are no longer arguing over speculative impacts or playing politics over whose department is more important.
Yeah.
They are looking at the same objective numbers and making deliberate business decisions together. The friction between the CISO and the factory plant manager disappears because they can both see the exact financial cost of patching versus not patching.
And crucially, AI makes this process quietly affordable to refresh. You don't have to hire a consulting firm every 6 months to redo your risk assessment. The AI is constantly updating that baseline of evidence, making the adaptability principle we talked about earlier actually possible.
It brings everything full circle. AI and cyber risk quantification are the engines that will finally make the zero-trust, risk-aligned, adaptable budgeting model achievable at an enterprise scale.
It moves cybersecurity from a dark art of fear-mongering into a mature, quantifiable discipline of corporate finance. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the KPMG and TAG Infosphere Survival Guide, the core lesson here is stark but necessary. Whether you are a CISO managing a multinational budget, a mid-level team leader trying to justify a new software license, or honestly, just a professional trying to manage the complex risk landscape of modern business, the era of implicit trust is over. You cannot rely on inertia.
You really can't.
You cannot rely on the budget you were handed last year.
You have to move toward evidence-based, risk-aligned decision-making.
Yeah.
Every choice and every dollar has to be justified by the documented reality of the threat landscape, not the ghost of last year's spreadsheet.
But if we take everything we've discussed today, this inevitable move toward perfectly quantified, AI-driven, real-time risk assessment, and we extrapolate that trajectory out another 10 years.
It leaves us with a rather profound, perhaps slightly unsettling question to consider.
Unsettling is the word, yeah.
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, if artificial intelligence and cyber risk quantification eventually reach a point where they can calculate exact threat probabilities in real time, matching specific vulnerabilities to specific defensive costs instantaneously, will the rigid, archaic concept of an annual budget completely disappear?
Wait, really? Disappear entirely?
Could we see a future where cybersecurity funding operates more like a high-frequency trading algorithm on Wall Street?
Oh, wow.
Think about it. Instead of a CISO asking the board for a lump sum of $20 million once a year, the enterprise financial system automatically deploys and retracts micro-investments to different digital defenses, shifting capital minute by minute based on the real-time weather patterns of global cyber threats.
A completely fluid, autonomous financial defense grid.
Yes.
The budget doesn't exist on a spreadsheet. It exists as a living algorithm.
Yeah.
That is an incredible thought to end on. From the college student's rigid ledger to a high-frequency algorithmic risk exchange. Thank you all for joining us for this deep dive. We highly encourage you to take this framework of reinvention, the principles of alignment and adaptability, and apply them to the messy, practical realities of your own organizations. Until next time.